Ciao a tutti. I'm making another video today about the Day of the Dead. And I have my recent article I just wrote for my website here. You could talk about this all day again. This is probably worth an entire book, so I try to capture as many highlights as I could. Today, I'll talk about the music and dance elements, actually, of mourning and the dead in relation to southern Italy, at least. And Day of the Dead, Il Giorno dei Morti, and in the image in this article I wrote here, you can see in the picture here, this is from Napoli, and this is a typical image or little tiny skull altar you might find at the Fontanelle Cemetery, and that is a famous cemetery for a quote-unquote cult of ancestors that happens there. It's a typical display of how Italians look at the dead, especially the older generation, how the dead really don't ever leave us. They're kind of always with us through prayers or through some kind of connection, dreams even. And unlike today in the modern Western American modern sense, how when somebody dies, the dead, in the Southern Italian sense, especially the older generation, they're never really dead, just physically gone, but spiritually, they're very much alive. But as I said, I'm going to talk about just exclusively the music and dance elements historically related to Italian processions of the dead, or in relation to the dead in general. In this image here, I have a friscalettu, which is a popular flute in southern Italy. It's a very short flute, makes a very high-pitched sound. It's used in a lot of Tarantella. And this flute, in general, was associated with death in the Middle Ages. It was a popular instrument to play in the Middle Ages. And it was eventually linked to a bunch of spooky stuff by the church. But today we still have it in Tarantella. And I'm going to read to you this excerpt by Andrea Romanazzi in his La Stregoneria in Italia, page 105, I believe this is. And it goes something like this. In Clemens Protropictus, I'm not sure how to say it. I think it's either Latin or Greek here. We hear of a rustic song relating to the dismemberment of Dionysus. Dionysus being the rising and dying god, dying and rising god of an ancient Greek, Mani Grecia, ancient, Roman times, ancient Greek times, sung during the grape harvest. He says, "Let us think again of the laments of the winemakers of the land of Canaan, which, according to the accounts reported by Herodotus, were sung in numerous areas of the Mediterranean basin during the harvest period. These too are songs of suffering that revisit the theme of pain, for the death of the plant, and therefore of the dying god, in which emphasize man's state of crisis, his hidden fear, his fear not without guilt. These dances were not without sexual charge and obscene display, aimed at manifesting the energy that the living human being would transmit to the fields throughout sympathetic imitation. Over the centuries, these dances lost their true meaning and thus merged with the medieval tradition of the dance macabre." This is the dance macabre in medieval depiction. Depicted in many churches, some cemeteries, and the wild hunt of witches. The protagonist is death, who, playing the flute, friscalettu, most likely, carries away the dead, an image later interpreted as a symbol of the Black Lady's democratic nature. And the dance macabre, or the dance macabre, some people say it in English, the dance as you see it here, where it's a bunch of dancing skeletons, looks pretty strange. Like, why are a bunch of skeletons dancing? Many scholars also link this, I've read, to the Black Plague. It's another thing for it. Again, this whole idea that the dead are still alive with us, really, they're just dancing. The dead love to dance, I guess. They love sweets too. Which is another very popular thing, not just actually in Italy, but it's actually around the world. You'll see this idea that the dead love sweet food as offerings. Flowers and sweet foods, a very popular thing around the world. in terms of this. But here you have the dead dancing, you have the flute, and all of this becomes something very creepy or sinister, I think, in the modern time, or later on, at least in the church's view. Moving on back to the flute, he goes on to say, in reality, death replaces the flutist, who, in pagan tradition, it led the funeral procession and accompanied the so-called mischievous dance around the god's coffin in an endless circle. Contrary to what one might think, this was neither a mournful nor demonic dance, but rather a metaphor for gaiety and vitality. Groups of people shouted, celebrated, leaped, and displayed their nakedness, roaming the countryside led by priests masked with the god's totem animal. This is where we get the idea of, in Halloween, at least in the American sense, of these, satanic whatever demons and creatures of the night in animal forms of goats and things like this. He's relating a lot of these themes of today back to, and even the dance macabre, based in skeletons, back to this idea that people would take on these animal forms or these other forms in costume, much like you see in Venetian masks or masks throughout Italy, also taking on the different form of that character. From the outsider, that was them either transforming into these things or it was evil from those that didn't understand. Anyways, he goes on to say, bringers of abundance to key places and moments of the agricultural and liturgical calendar. Because we have, Halloween, All Hallows Eve in Old English, meaning the eve before the hallowed day. We have All Saints' Day, and then we have All Souls' Day on November 2nd. It was with the advent of Christianity that these playful rambles transformed into demonic encounters, he says. And by transfiguring their images and meanings, fertility rituals came to be associated exclusively with the orgiastic and diabolical, later becoming a wild hunt. That's what he has to say about the dance macabre and the flute, and specifically related to the dead and these ancient agricultural rituals that have, come down today. Is really a lot of these Halloween costumes, I think, as they've evolved, at least that's my opinion, they've evolved from these medieval times, really, in these very ancient times where we've kind of lost that connection to it. Now it's, a big party, especially in America. We have these big parties and on Halloween night, and we dress up as all these different spooky characters, when really they have this really old lineage into these dance traditions, musical traditions, honoring the dead, honoring the ancestors, very far removed from the secular way we look at it today, at least, again, in the American sense or the modern sense. Moving on from that, which you can read more about in the article, because I wrote a lot more about that in there as well, and a lot of other traditions. But I want to move on to a very important person who's passed away now. She's known as the Queen of Sicilian folk music. This is Rosa Balestreri. And she is very popular to this day. She wrote a lot of great music, had a very rustic voice, very raw voice. It was not refined, almost like an American Janis Joplin type voice. Wasn't necessarily like a clean singer, in a way, the way her voice sounded, but it was very passionate. It was very deeply passionate, where you wanted to listen to her. And the lyrics are very deeply passionate, sometimes even gruesome. But she sings a lot about traditional songs that go back to Sicilian history, and they relate to what's going on today, and politics around the world. I would say even like American politics too. It's a never-ending story, just repeating itself. But she has a song, Testa di Morto, the head of death, and or the skull. This is talking about, and the lyrics, are very. It really relates to this Southern Italian idea of death, really. It really captures the essence of it. I'm going to read it to you. It's a very short song, really. It goes, last night I dreamed of a skull, and with that skull I began to speak. I said, "O skull, what news do you bring me?" With the skull I began to speak. I said, "O skull, what news do you bring me?" My dear friend, brace yourself, because when the time comes, I'll come to take you. My dear friend, brace yourself, because when the time comes, I'll come to take you. And it's again a very short song, but the way she sings it, it's like a lament. The song is very much like a prayer or like a lament to the skull. My dear friend, you know, it's like speaking to a loved one or somebody close to you, and the speaking to the skull and the dialogue with the skull. Obviously, the skull's not alive; the person has died, but it's this idea, almost in the sense that this individual is still with you even after death. That the dialogue between you two does not die with physical death, and I think that really speaks to the Southern Italian idea of death. You know, even till this day, a lot of Italian Americans, you know, especially the older generation, will bring flowers and talk to the dead, pray to the dead. It's still a very real thing, especially for the older generation, that, you know, death is not really death. Nothing really dies. It just transforms in a sense, which again is very different from today's idea. Somebody's dead, they're gone. And to get to the core meaning of this, I think for today, you know, if you want to really contemplate this time of the year, this season, a time of, you know, the spookiness, aside from the spookiness, just a time of death and harvest, you know, I think we can embrace those old ideas of, you know, knowing that when somebody dies, they're not really dead necessarily, because they're in your memory. And if they're really in your memory, are they really ever dead? You know, you have to think about it, I think, that way. Even some of these people that are 2,000 years old dead, and we're still reading about them, whether they're philosophers or kings or whatever, whoever the hell they are. You know, I mean, they're still very much alive, you know, in the psyche of human beings, you know. And you can argue, well, that's not really alive. And, yeah, I argue that it is, because, you know, they're still consciously in the consciousness of humanity. So it's still very much alive in a very either psychological way or spiritual way you want to look at it. But I think we can embrace those ideas of, you know, don't ever look at things as gone. Just look at them as transformed, you know, because it's still very much here. And if they exist in you, then they exist. But that's my ideas about that. Anyways, this is the video for today. Please read the article. You can look at it on my website and read it. It's the latest article. It's really juicy. As much in there as I could put in there in an article. And goodbye for now. Enjoy your Halloween. Enjoy your party. Don't party too hard. And ciao. Ciao, ciao, ciao.